Boatworks Today is sponsored by Total Boat and Alexial Yacht Coatings, as well as supported by the generosity from the beautiful folks over on Patreon. Thank you so much. So welcome back to the shop, everybody. Hope you are all having a fantastic weekend. My name is Andy with Boatworks Today, and in this video, I want to try and tackle a problem that I've been running into for the last 3-ish years. Specifically a problem that I'm running into during the winter months, which around here is about half of the year. So here's the deal. Now, 3 years ago, when we moved into this new house, we had our first power outage, which normally isn't a big deal. But that first outage lasted about 3 full days. Now, again, being in a new area, in a new house, I didn't know if this was a common thing that happened all the time or if it was just like a one-off, rare kind of a situation. But either way, it kind of turned on a little bit of a light bulb saying that you may want to get some kind of a backup type of system in place, right? It's one thing when the power goes out in the summertime. It's a whole nother matter when the power is out in the wintertime, especially in the dead of winter. So on the hunt for a generator, we went. And long story short, fast forward, it took us about 6-7 months to, kind of piecing things together, finally get it start to finish, hooked up and running. And by the way, one of the best decisions I've ever made up to this point. But one thing I realized that first winter is that we have an issue with this corner of the house. We have an issue with snow packing in, and specifically packing this gas regulator that is feeding the generator. Now, when this regulator is packed full of snow, it can't regulate, can't do its thing, which means that the generator is not able to fire. Now, if that happens in the middle of the day, no big deal. But if it happens in the middle of the night, that can be really, really inconvenient. So I knew that I needed to come up with some type of a cover that'll fit over this regulator, something that's easily removed and so that I can inspect it and clean it out if I have to. Now I did the obvious thing. I looked around online for something that was already pre-made, and I wasn't having any luck. So I took some measurements and jotted down some ideas on some paper, and this is kind of what I come up with. Now this is post-battle. But anyways, the long story of what I did is I just made a simple box out of plywood and then drilled holes in the ends, ran a piece of, I think this is like 1.5-inch PVC, ran that through there, and then ran that through the bandsaw and split it into 2 different halves. We got the top half and then the bottom half. Now, when I sized the dimensions for this box, I did it so that the outside dimensions of the box itself was going to be, when it was all said and done, the inside dimensions of the parts that I was going to be casting off of this mold. I was a little unsure if I actually took my measurements accurately by the time I got everything built, because I was kind of rushing. This is back just right before I had my surgery. So I was a little bit distracted trying to get this at least to a certain point before I was completely laid up for an extended period of time. So I threw this together hoping that my measurements were right. And then after it was split, glued it down onto some plywood, like a backer panel kind of a deal. And that was going to be the platform that I was going to be working on. Now, it's at this point, this is where the video begins. when you're looking at the chop strand matting, you may have noticed that the edges of all the little pieces, they were all frayed, and this was done on purpose. With chop strand matting, especially when you're working with small little parts like this, it's a lot easier to work with several small pieces than it is to work with larger pieces that are essentially cut to shape and, and trying to make it fit when you're trying to wet everything out and the material is stretching and all that other good stuff. So by using these smaller pieces where the edges are all frayed, when they're laid over top of one another, all of those little wispy edges in little strands, they kind of intertwine with all of the other pieces. So rather than dealing with, say, 4 small pieces, by the time they're all kind of locked in together, it's kind of like you're working with one larger piece rather than 4 individual pieces. So now with both boxes glassed, I want to go over top of all of the surfaces to help fill in the texture from that chop strand matting, so that I'll be able to come back in here in a few more steps and sand everything down and get a smooth surface. Now for this, because I'm trying to get some build, I am using a non-waxed, just regular gel coat. I'm going to use this as my base layer to fill in the texture, and then after this material sets up, then I'll come back with some gel coat that contains wax, and that will cure everything off so that I'll be able to sand it without gumming up and going through a bunch of sheets of sandpaper. So now at this point, I've taken what I'm going to be referring to as the plug. I've taken this as far as I'm going to. The surface, for the most part, is pretty smooth. It doesn't need to be perfect. Reality is that all the parts that I'm going to be casting on top of this plug, it's going to end up being the inside of each of these parts. So visibility is really a non-issue. But what is a big issue is to make sure that everything that I'm going to be laying up on top of this plug, that it will release, and I'll be able to separate those two when that time comes. So here I'm using a product that's called PVA, or polyvinyl alcohol. Basically, think of it like a liquid plastic. You put it on wet, let it dry, and then you've created a plastic film or a release barrier. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to apply 3 light coats of this PVA about every 2-3 hours apart. I want to make sure that each layer has thoroughly dried before I go ahead and apply the next successive coat. Now, up to this point, things were going pretty smooth, and that is all about to change. Now, destroying this plug or mold, however you want to refer to it, was definitely not part of the plan. I was hoping that I would be able to, at least if I had to, be able to salvage all that and make one extra piece in case this first round was a little too big or a little bit too small, but it pretty much destroyed everything in the process. But I did get the pieces separated. So anyway, so here I'm getting ready to do some trimming, and I just hot glued some tongue depressors in here just to use as alignment, between the two halves. So I'm gonna get these things lined up, clamp it all down, and then we're gonna give her a little haircut.
That is like perfect fit. All right. Yeah, that'll work perfect. We'll close up these holes on the ends. In there. a little better, and so it'll stick upright just like that. Beautiful.
Now, when I was designing this mold, there's a couple of different ways that I could have approached this. On one hand, if this was going to be something or a mold that I was going to be casting several parts, whether it's several dozen or even several hundred, if I were going to be using it that much, it would make a lot of sense. It would be easier to justify spending a lot of time up front getting the interior surface of the mold kind of fine-tuned and perfectly smooth, so that after every part was done, you popped it out, other than a little bit of trimming, it was completely finished. That approach takes, I don't know how long it actually would have taken, but in the past, if I had to spitball it, I'd say, I would have been looking at 20, maybe 30 hours of fine tuning to make that mold where it would be, literally pop it off. It's a one and done kind of a deal. Now, that wasn't my situation. This was going to be a one-use item. I mean, I have no intentions of casting a bunch of these parts and trying to sell them, because I might sell, I don't know, 2 or 3 of them over the next decade. So it just didn't make a lot of sense. What did make sense is to save all of that time, kind of prepping the mold, and take about a quarter of that time after the part was cast off, and then put that time into the actual finishing of the exterior. Because right now, on the mold, these things, they look a little fugly. So hardly what I would consider to be a finished piece. And that brings me to the question that I want to ask you, which is, how should I go about finishing this? Now, there's really 2 obvious options. I could either finish it in gel coat, or I could finish it with paint. Regardless, it'll look nice when it's all said and done, but regardless, I want this to look like a professionally manufactured part. I don't want it to look all rough and, kind of quick and dirty and cheap looking. That's just not how I roll. So I want it to look done when it's all finished. But it's a matter of which direction do I want to go, because there is going to be some fairing needed, as well as I'm sure there's some touch-ups that kind of got a little bit jacked up when I was trying to pop it out of the mold. So there's going to be some repair work, some fairing, that kind of thing. And depending on how I want to finish it, that is going to directly impact which materials I'm able to use for those fine-tuning steps. So down below in the comments, let me know how you'd like to see this finished. I know that one approach would be a lot easier. The other approach might have more interest as far as what the process looks like start to finish. I'm not going to tell you which is which, but that is for you guys to decide. And on that note, I'm going to wrap this video up. So as always, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you found it interesting. And if you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you're not already subscribed to this channel, hit the subscribe button along with the little bell next to it, so that you're notified whenever a new video comes out. Thank you in advance. Much appreciated. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to leave those down below. I'll do my best to follow up with you. And as always, I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful rest of the weekend, and I'll see you in the next video. And if anybody is curious how my surgery went, the surgery itself has gone quite well. This was surgery number 2 on my left arm. I am 3 weeks post-surgery as of yesterday. So the surgery itself has gone well. The recovery, at least the way that I'm remembering it, the recovery on number 2 seems to be a little bit slower and a bit more uncomfortable compared to the number 1, which was my right shoulder. But all things considered, at 3 weeks, I think that I'm doing quite well. I know I'm supposed to be wearing a sling, but I did this on my first shoulder, and I was twice as far ahead in half the time compared to what's typical as far as the recovery. So I ran this all past, what I'm doing through my doctor as well as the PT people, and they kind of cringed, but they said, whatever you're doing, it works. So just be careful, don't do anything stupid. And that's what I'm trying my best not to do. So, quick little update, I'm doing well, but it's still quite slow and uncomfortable, but every day is just a little bit better, and at the end of the day, I'll take it. Mainly because I don't have a choice.
This has been a Boatworks Today production.